All right, this is the June 27th meeting of the Sustainability Board in Satellite Beach. Let's start with the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All righty, how's everybody doing tonight?
Good.
Yeah, we should have passed it out, like when somebody's...
Okay, we're going to get started off with public comment, and if you are commenting on one of our agenda items, please hold off until that item comes up on the agenda. But if you do have some other item to discuss, you're welcome to bring it up now.
Hi, everyone.
Okay, please come to the microphone and state your name and address.
Hey, how you doing? Hi, I am Mike Lipsky. I am a resident here in Satellite Beach since '99. I live on Hamlin Avenue. First time here at one of your meetings. This is pretty cool. I had a question for you guys. I'm representing Hamlin Avenue and a group of us on Hamlin there. We are having excuse me, some issues with rust in our water. This has been going on for a couple of months, even before a lot of the construction or the new water pipes are being installed along A1A in Elwood. It was before that time. So about 2 months, maybe since April, we've been having a lot of rust. And it's a cluster of about 8 of us that are kind of in a circle on Hamlin. So we're not sure why it's just us. Me and another neighbor sent surveys to all of Hamlin and around us to kind of identify where the issue was happening. And it's just kind of a circle of us. And in any case, I'm here. I'm hoping maybe you guys can direct me in the right direction. But we've contacted the City of Melbourne, and they're kind of just giving us a runaround as to what the problem is from, and also when Hamlin is actually going to get new water lines. So me and Sheila Young across the street have contacted them numerous times. We can't really get an answer back. I was wondering if you guys could, if someone here had contacts with City of Melbourne that could reach out to them and maybe get a date for the people in our group on Hamlin there as to when the pipes will be fixed, because we're all pretty concerned about it right now. So we just want, if somebody had contacts that could help reach out for us. And am I at the right meeting to ask that question?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
You got the right person. She's sitting right over there.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, you can
Right.
always call us, and we'll call the utilities on your behalf.
Oh.
So if you have a phone number and contact information, you can leave Julie right there.
Okay.
She's my assistant.
Yeah.
We'll call them tomorrow.
Okay.
And I'll figure that out for you.
Awesome.
So yeah, whenever you have a problem like that and you're getting the runaround from the utilities, we'll be glad to intervene on your behalf.
Okay.
At any time. So just always call us, and we'll call you back tomorrow and give you an answer.
Okay. Great. All right.
Mike, did you venture out any further than just Hamlin to see if any other people are having the same issue?
We did just a few houses on, I can't think of the street over from us.
Sherwood?
Sherwood. We did a few houses on Sherwood, and those people said no, and then we did one block south, just randomly, and we didn't get any feedback. It was,
Is the rust chronic, or is it something that kind of clears up after you run the faucet for a while?
so to describe the issue, there's mainly 6 of us right here in a circle where it's severe. So it's, you'll turn on the faucet, hot or cold, and it'll be clear. Next thing you know, it's just shooting out like dark brown water that goes on for about 30 seconds until the line clears. So it's, it seems as if there's something in the pipe. Either the pipes around us are corroding right in our sector, or something broke free from A1A. And
Sounds like something
lodged
broke,
right by us.
and the pressure's sucking in to your system. So there's a line that's broken somewhere around your house
Yeah.
or in that area.
Has pressure changed at all?
No, pressure seems pretty good. So,
It's not a main, it's just a regular
See
line.
how long the issue is going on for?
2 months.
2 months?
Yeah.
They did the work right about 2 months ago, right on A1A, right in front of that section.
That just
Okay.
identifies the homes, and that's the letter we sent to the city, so.
Very
Does
similar.
anybody else want a copy of that, Chrissy? But our contact information's on there for you.
Oh, okay, great, thank you.
But if anyone else wanted a map of the houses that that it's affecting, and the letter we've sent so far, you good? Or you want-
I'd be happy. Thanks.
Cool. All right, that's all. I'll get in contact with Julian. See what happens. Any other questions about it?
I have this, so I can ship,
Okay.
we've got it. This is good, thank you.
Thanks, Mike.
All right,
Thanks,
thanks for
Mike.
letting me
Thank
speak.
you.
I'll hang out and listen. Pretty cool.
Okay, any other public comment? Okay,
Wait.
we got,
These.
so you're gonna, okay.
So, yes, come on.
It's really weird.
I'm John Sutcliffe from Melbourne, Florida. And my purpose here is to let you know about a project that's starting off ahead of the elections called the Environmental Voter Project. Has anybody heard of that?
No.
Dylan has heard about it. Nobody? It's a project that is kind of counterintuitive. The political organizations typically focus on people that they know are voters, the warm voters, because these are the people that are going to flip the election. The Environmental Voter Project pays more attention to people who are not voting, and in particular, environmentalists who are not voting. Because what we found is that environmentalists are uniquely awful voters. They don't turn out. They say they vote, but they're lying their pants off. And so the Environmental Voter Project is designed to identify who these people are, which we do with big data techniques, along with the voter rolls, which are publicly available, and then organize a very specialized Get Out the Vote campaign around that. Just to get some numbers to show you the size of the challenge or the opportunity that we've got, there are about, in round numbers, 200 million registered voters in the United States. And roughly 20 million of those are environmentalists. But their turnout is abysmal. Their turnout rate is about 10 to 20 percentage points below the average for the rest of the voting population. So when we think about why politicians are not paying more attention to environmental priorities, that's the reason. Politicians only pay attention to people who vote. All right? So the Environmental Voter Project is going to be about going after those folks. We're going to start with District 4 for the County Commission. The point is not to endorse a specific candidate. This, in fact, is a rigorously nonpartisan organization, and its goal is not to get people elected. Its goal is to change the electorate so that over time, more environmentalists are showing up at the polls, and so that as a result of that, environmentalism, climate change, and so forth will work its way up the list of things that politicians are concerned about. Now it's almost dead last. You know, politicians will say, yeah, I know people are concerned, but, you know, I'm not paying any attention to it because these aren't the people that are voting.
How are you guys defining environmentalists?
So then,
How, again, are you identifying what?
Well, we are using big data techniques.
Right. Part of an
Of course, who is voting is a matter of public record.
Sure.
So that's easy to get. What's not easy to get, you would think, is whether any of these people are environmentalists. That is, they're people who are placing environmental concerns at the top of the list in terms of political policy, right? So what we know from the models that's been developed is that there's a lot of publicly available information about people's buying habits, about the organizations they belong to, about their social attitudes, and so forth. And so we can run regression models, and that's been done, to say, this is the subset, let's test this. This is the subset that should consist of people who have a high priority on environmentalism. And then poll that subset to ask them that question directly. And it turns out that this model is about 90% accurate. So we don't ask people whether they're environmentalists. We use data about them and parse that data so as to pull out the subset of people that are very highly likely to be environmentalists. And that's been tested. It's been tested over 3 election cycles now in the Boston area, and it's been very powerful in predicting what's going to happen. Now, the next question is, if people say they are environmentalists and tell you that they're voting and lying to you, how do you solve that problem? And the way to solve that problem, we think, is with behavioral science techniques. People like to keep their promises, particularly Americans are proud of keeping their promises. So we ask them to promise to vote. We know who they are, we knock on their door, we give them a pledge card, ask them to sign that, and we promise that we'll follow up a couple of weeks before the election to remind them of their promise. And then we drop a hint that, oh, and maybe we'll get back to you after the election to ask you how it went. And so they know that someone is interested in the fact that they've made a promise and that they will be watching, because whether they vote or not is a matter of public record. The supervisor elections takes very accurate counts of that. The other thing is that we will know with a great deal of granularity what's happening in their neighborhoods. We'll be able to say to them, for example, did you know that 87% of the people on your block voted in the last election? Right?
You got about 1 minute left, because if you can, try to wrap it up a little bit, because we have
Okay,
to
so
continue on.
that's basically it. So the ask that I'm going to make is that, number one, you go to the website, environmentalvoter.org, take the pledge to vote. I know you're all regular voters anyway, but we'd like to have you in the database. And then if you feel so inclined, check the box that says, I would like to volunteer. Because as I said, this is a get out the vote kind of campaign, and we're going to need people to be making phone calls, knocking doors, that kind of thing. And if you know others who might like to pitch in, we'd like to know that as well.
All right.
All right,
Thank you a lot.
I have a real quick question. What are some of the resources one can use to learn about one's preferences or inclinations as it relates to being an environmentalist?
How do we know that?
Yeah. What are some of the sources one can use to learn that about somebody?
It's publicly available information. There's a lot of polling that's going on. There's a lot of feedback from the clicks that you make on Facebook and other places.
And how do we acquire that? How can one acquire that?
It's membership through bigger data programs. So
Yeah, they have their own
these
equations.
these are essentially like a massive collection of, there's like Esri, there's a lot of facilities that collect all this data, and then you can subscribe to have access to that data. And this is actually, I do want to thank you for this initiative. I heard about it from Karen. There's a lot of people using these exact methods against us. The Koch brothers recently did it in Nashville to shut down a transportation bill, and they directly targeted the people they knew they could get on their side, knocked on their doors, essentially did exactly what you said, try to get them to promise that they're going to stand with them against this, and they actually shot down a bill that the preliminary vote showed that it would pass without a problem. This is happening all over the U.S., so I do thank you for your grassroots efforts in this, because this is a powerful method being used against us right now. So, yeah.
So you may wonder, why am I here talking to Satellite Beach? We've got a very critical primary election coming up, as you know, one which has recently been closed. But we have to figure out a maneuver that might work in that case. The outcome of this primary election is probably going to determine the character, the inclinations of the Brevard Board of Commissioners for maybe the next 8 years. It's right now hanging in the balance. We basically have a 3-2 split, and it could easily go the other way. And believe me, if it does, I, for one, am not going to like what I see. So it's important that people turn out in this primary. There are about 94,000 registered voters in District 4, which includes Satellite Beach. In the last non-presidential primary election, primary in a non-presidential year, which is always low turnout, out of that 94,000 voters, there were 1,200 votes cast.
Yeah.
Who are these candidates that are going to be running? And
on the Republican side, the candidates are Kurt Smith, who's the incumbent, and Trudy Infantini. And we're not saying this candidate or that candidate. I think if you have environmental chops, you'll be able to figure it out.
Yeah.
Right?
Thank you, John.
Okay. Thanks for your time.
thank you.
All right. Any other questions? All right, we're gonna, in the last meeting, we were discussing, or we actually took, we decided that we were going to have a presentation on fluoride presented to the board members so that we can make a recommendation to City Council on whether we think it's wise to ask them to remove to ask the City of Melbourne to remove fluoride from the drinking water. What we'd like to do tonight is we're going to have Nick present the argument. Just the facts to, okay. But you're going to be presenting the side of that fluoride is good, all right? Or
Facts. Just the facts.
just the facts, okay. Scientific data, okay. And we're also going to have Linda? Yes. Both you guys going to present, or? Okay. So you're also going to present on what you believe we should deal with fluoride in drinking water. The facts, okay. All right, so who wants to start?
Can I ask a real quick question?
Sure.
What will this body have in terms of an ability to ask questions and or talk about some points that have already been shared?
Yeah, so following the presentations, we can, actually, I guess after each presentation, we can ask questions and discuss anything that pertains to that particular presentation.
All right, good deal. And then, obviously, we'll have an opportunity to say our piece?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you.
You might not need it, but
Oh, thank you.
just for a quick review,
Go to the bathroom real quick, but drop it there. Perfect, thank you.
And a couple more of these out here, and then I can make more copies too. I'll wait for Jazz to get back before you start.
Yeah, she just wants to stop now. She wasn't prepared to hold it through all the presentation.
Nick, how long is your presentation?
It's about 10 slides.
Okay.
Keeps it pretty concise.
Linda, how about you? What do you think yours, how long is your presentation?
I'll probably need about 10 minutes.
Okay.
That's it.
So I just brushed my teeth with some fluoride,
Well, Brad,
just to let you all know, so, okay. But what is the main difference between the fluoride that I have in my toothpaste versus the fluoride that's in the water?
the element that it
Just, yeah, just wait like 2
Okay.
minutes and you're gonna have
Well,
the whole
just-
thing.
And I just don't, like, a lot of dead time.
So I will preface it and say that since Linda did come and present us before, there are some things that I think we should be presenting on based on your previous presentation that I didn't cover because I knew you were going to cover them. So I just kept it very scientific, very factual, and hopefully very short and sweet to the point.
Oh, okay. I was like,
She ran the back.
Great eye contact.
Okay.
Okay, all right, so, it's a fluoride review, and that was up.
Nick, do you want me to sit over there? I'll get you.
Yeah, will you please?
I just want to know.
Till the dead silence.
Of course. All right, go ahead. So, background on fluoride, the image is of actual fluoride and how it exists in the environment. It is an inorganic, monatomic anion of fluorine. So, if I have my periodic table of elements up there, you see that where it would lay on the periodic table. But the chemical formula for it is F minus. The minus denotes a available electron. And because of the available electron, it combines very easily with naturally occurring elements like sodium and calcium. So in the environment, you tend to see it in forms like this because it naturally occurs bonding to things because of its available electron. So it'll bond to salts, it'll bond to calcium. The water fluoridation, the process of adding fluoride to water supplies in order to prevent tooth decay. This is the talking point that is of great concern because that's why it's added to our water supply. The idea of what is tooth decay? Tooth decay forms when bacteria found in dental plaque break down dietary sugars and produce acid. That acid can dissolve tooth enamel, which causes cavities. The idea of water fluoridation is that fluoride becomes topically applied, chemically incorporated into the tooth. So when you brush your teeth, when you drink water, when you consume a substance that has fluoride in it, the fluoride F minus will then break the bond with the naturally occurring calcium or salt, or in the case of hydrofluorosilicic acid, which is what's in the water supply, it will break that bond and attach itself to your teeth to better protect them from cavities. Now, that process prevents tooth decay according to all the different groups that we looked at, and there's a huge list at the end of this report, which you'll see our laundry list of different sites that we visited. The two main ones is the EPA and the WHO, the World Health Organization. The concentration standards have been rigorously decided upon and tested through the years of peer-reviewed journals, and they've come up with the 4 milligrams per liter from the EPA with the primary standard and then the secondary standard of 2 milligrams per liter. And the WHO, the World Health Organization, is even less than that, which is 0.5 milligrams per liter to 1.5 milligrams per liter. Why this all happened was because in the early 1800s, there was a case of what they call Colorado stain,
where residents of a small town in Colorado were found to have brown stained teeth. And I didn't want to put the picture up there because that's the kind of thing. If you want to see it, you can look it up. They lost a lot of their teeth also in the same town, and there was a question of whether these two things were related or not. And it seems that they may have been, that the high levels of fluoridation that naturally occurred in the water supply was actually preventing tooth decay in the teeth that were left in the mouths of the Colorado residents. So those residents were then studied, and over the next 45 years, it was decided that a specific level of fluoride would be added to the water of Grand Rapids, Michigan. And after applying this use of fluoridation, they found a 55.5 reduction in cavities across that city. So that's the start of fluoridation in the water supply. Now, did they use the same fluoride that we use today? Probably not, because the process of hydrofluorosilicic acid being created wasn't around back then, so they probably used the natural versions of the calcium or the salt to bind it and add it to the water supply. Now, numerous cities began fluoridation after those efforts were made, and hearing the success of Grand Rapids. Shortly thereafter, the Public Health Service and the American Dental Association endorsed the idea of water fluoridation in 1950. And they said it was one of the 10 great public health achievements of the century. And it is in common with municipal use today. Specifically, 74.4% of American communities' water systems receive fluoride water as of 2014. Also, 77.6% of Florida's population receives water fluoridation. So it's the norm among American communities. Go ahead, next one. Here's the actual showing of how it exists. Hydrofluorosilicic acid, that's the chemical expression of it. So the recommended minimum and maximum we've talked about through the different organizations, the WHO, the EPA, they each have their standards. The cavities and tooth decay may occur if there's not enough fluoride concentrations in the water to those studies. High concentrations of fluoride within the water may result in dental and skeletal fluorosis. So the idea is that they originally found that excess naturally occurring fluoride, and it wasn't just here, it's all around the world too. If it exists in high levels, it can cause your teeth to fall out or your bones to degrade, because that active fluoride ion will bond with, like I said, sodium or calcium, and your bones are primarily calcium. So that's where that happens. At certain levels, they found that at 1.2 milligrams per liter of fluoride may give rise to mild dental fluorosis, study in 1994 by the WHO. And then slightly higher levels, 1.5 to 2 milligrams of fluoride in drinking water, increases that risk of dental fluorosis with values exceeding 2 milligrams per liter to have very high chances of dental and skeletal fluorosis according to the World Health Organization. So there's an agreement among professionals that it is dangerous at high levels. Now, intakes above 6 milligrams per day have been shown to increase the effects of skeletal fluorosis, where intakes above 14 will pose serious threats to severe effects. And again, if you'd like to look at any of these pictures, they're pretty dramatic. They don't want to, cause a shock and awe campaign. Go to the next one. The daily acceptable intake, according to these organizations, 0.5 milligrams per day for a 60 kilogram individual. This is where we get our standards through the city of Melbourne, and I'll go over that next. The daily intake of 1 to 3 milligrams per day, preventing dental cavities, again, is the reason behind this. And they even looked at it for specifically children under 6, and the next graph you'll see is for children under 12, keeping that dose low based on their body weight. Now, some countries don't use fluoridation, and they've also seen a drop in cavities. So, continue on the next slide. These are countries with fluoridated water, and they include Australia, Chile, Ireland, Israel, New Zealand, South Korea, Spain, United Kingdom, and the United States. From 1975 on the far left to 2014 on the right, the average decayed milligrams of actual tooth decay per child at the age of 12. So in the 70s, it was higher. By late 2014, it was lower. Go to the next slide. And we see a similar trend here in the countries that don't use fluoridated water. And they include a laundry list of countries, including Italy, Greece, Germany, France, Denmark, Czech Republic, Canada, Belgium, and Sweden, Netherlands, and Norway, and Portugal, and so on. So there's a general trend that's existing beyond fluoridation. It seems that tooth decay itself is actually the decline, an exception for the one like blue line, it looks like Mexico, which they may have other issues in their water for other reasons. So continuing on to the next one. So the question was then, is it carcinogenic? Does it cause cancer? According to all the studies and all the reviews that we did, through all these different journals and research, the answer is the general consensus among reviews to date, as listed above, there is no strong evidence of a link between water fluoridation and cancer. Some reviews suggest that there should be further studies, but the general consensus is no. All right, go ahead, next one. So, for us here today, we get our water from the city of Melbourne, and the city of Melbourne began adding fluoride to its water in 1966. As such, that was directed by the Florida Board of Health. They created an ordinance, which was passed at the time to follow that directive. Since then, they've been monitoring the quality and quantity of the chemicals added to the part of the water treatment process. The only minimum amount of fluoride recommended for public health was added. That level that was added was between 0.6 and 0.7 milligrams per liter. So well within the World Health Organization and EPA standards. That complies with the current recommended level. Those levels were monitored at the lab, and they do use the hydrofluorosilicic acid. And as you'll hear, that is a byproduct of the process of removing fluoride from phosphate in phosphate mining for agricultural purposes. It was also used in the past and was allowed to be unchecked as it was put into the air, and they had issues with livestock. All that aside, trying to keep it to the facts, this is what's used today, hydrofluorosilicic acid, and it's not required by the state of Florida, so they could use other forms if it was available, but this is what's available. This is what they chose to use. For the next slide. It was used at a cost of $57,600, a very small portion of their $4.006 million budget for water treatment for the city of Melbourne. And again, that water is naturally found in Lake Washington and in the groundwater, which is where we get our water from the city of Melbourne. The surface water accounts for 2/3, and the groundwater accounts for 1/3 of the total water that we get from the city of Melbourne. Within those different water bodies, you'll find concentrations of naturally existing fluoride of 0.2 and 0.3 milligrams per liter, 0.2 in the surface water and 0.3 in the groundwater. So it doesn't actually occur. So it's already in the water before it gets processed. The hydrofluorosilicic acid is then added, and it has been added. They can find it for the last 18 years. I asked them to find any data on what they used before that, but there's no record of that in their non-computer files. They have to find it in an old paper copy somewhere. And they said they would look, so they're trying to figure that out. It was recently used in 2017 as an agent to determine where water goes because of its nature. It was out of the system while they were repairing parts of the system, and then they had to reapply it to the system, to the city of Melbourne, and when they did, they can track the concentration where it was added and the concentration where it exited. That allows them to determine if there's any leaks in the pipes. It's a pretty clever way of figuring that out. Go ahead with the next one. And so for the discussion portion, wanted to look at the pros and cons, the agreements for or against. We will look at things like the reductions in tooth decay, the populations that don't have access to good dental health and the ability to get a stable supply of the fluorine ion into their community. Talk about is it topical or consumed orally. Let's add in the fourth column because your toothpaste has a form of fluoride which allows the oral component to be topical and not consumed. Know that costing a lot of people that have children and personal experience with tasty toothpaste. I know that some people have eaten it, and it's directly explicitly said not to do on the box. It says it right there. And then the medical community itself has gone out and said publicly that they support putting fluoride in water to reduce cavities. And then the arguments against include things like, again, the reductions in tooth decay from the CDC. Is that a trend, or based on the graphs that we showed, is that a trend that coincides with another trend? Is that something that is indeed the only cause for the reduction in cavities? Is it not because of general just dental health or other things along those lines? Additional sources of fluoride, not just toothpaste, but food, water, Things that we consume that have that water in it, also then consumed and have that fluoride in it. Community consent, was it given consent to do this? Is that right or wrong? And again, topical versus consumed early for kids, so the argument can go either way. And then what type of fluoride is being used? Is it best to use the more natural, or is it okay to use the hydrofluorosilicic, which is the current standard for the city of Melbourne? So with that, I'll open up any questions, and we can start a small dialogue, but I want to make sure we leave time for the second presentation. Go ahead.
Yeah, a few questions on John.
Will you come up to the microphone, please, just so that we can record, get your voice?
Thank you for making this an agenda item. Let's start at the back and go forward. The comment I want to make is hydrofluorosilicic acid is not naturally occurring. It must be manufactured. Sodium fluoride and calcium fluoride are naturally occurring. Going even further back, water is not the only factor when considering tooth decay or missing teeth. For example, diet. One of the things I'm going to talk about, but here's a question. How is the daily dose accomplished when body size and thirst are variables?
Right.
You talked about, the mean consumption or the average consumption of water. How is that possibly accomplished? And then the last thing I wanted to point out, you went by it pretty quickly, but the Grand Rapids results did not include hydrofluorosilicic acid. Hydrofluorosilicic acid is what Melbourne is putting in our water today.
Right, because it didn't exist at that point in time.
I had just a couple quick comments. There were 2 dissenting votes. It said 6-1 on there, but there were 2. Yeah, I have to see one, so. I went back and pulled the actual meeting minutes. Okay. What was the other thing? Of course, the Grand Rapids results. There's a lot of controversy about that. Some scientists that were involved that were actually children that grew up in that area. About the sampling sizes and things like that. And really it was Grand Rapids that started it all. And you said that hydrofluorosilicic acid, the addition of that was not mandated by the state. No fluoridation is mandated by the state.
Right.
So it's not just that particular chemical or opposed to another. But there's no fluoridation. And yes, there's a lot of areas that are fluoridated, but by the grace of God, there are some that aren't, including 2 of our adult sons and their families. I've called one in Hernando County and one in Palm Beach, and they live in areas in the state of Florida that are not fluoridated, which is wonderful.
Thank you for the clarification on the data. Any comments from the board?
Yeah, I just had a quick comment. So it seems like there's fluoride in almost all toothpaste now. There's fluoride mouthwashes. How do we know that we're not getting too much fluoride? So if you're getting it through the water, and then you're using fluoride toothpaste, and you're using a fluoride mouthwash.
It's a great question. So if you visit your dentist today versus if you visited your dentist 20 years ago, your conversation might be different. I know that when I went to the dentist, they would always give you the fluoride treatment as part of the visit.
Right.
It's not standard anymore. Things have changed. So that concept, which is also to your point about you drink water, how much you drink before you drink more than your allotted amount, again, this is all part of the conversation. So do we need additional fluoride in our water if we're getting it from the sources? It's a perfectly good question to ask.
And David, I would like to point out more and more toothpaste are actually creating a version without fluoride now because of the awareness. And so the consumers are actually now turning it in the opposite direction.
So
however, the topical version of fluoride applied directly to the teeth is the
better way to do it.
That's what they find.
You should be doing it topically and not ingesting it. But
So one of the very first things that will reveal itself if you're consuming too much fluoride is you'll have dental fluorosis, which your dentist will be able to identify real quick. And I polled a bunch of dentists within Brevard County only, and all of them said that their patient population that have signs of dental fluorosis is less than 1%.
Hey, Matt, quick question. What was the age of that percentage?
I didn't ask. I just asked dentists.
Curious to find what was among younger or older population.
Yeah. There was one dentist that gave me some feedback thinking that he reiterated the stat of less than 1%, and he said that he thinks that the patients that he sees that do is a result of a mother who, during carrying the child, was supplementing with fluoride, and it probably occurred then. That's what, but he doesn't have anything to back that up. It was just a pure speculation on his part, but less than 1%. Dental fluorosis.
How many dentists did you talk to?
7.
I also
Different
had-
regions.
Okay. I also had a question for you. The hydrofluorosilicic acid, are the facts that you presented about fluoride, are they all true for that type of fluoride as well?
Right, for any form of fluoride ions is the thing that's going to bind to the calcium or to the salt. In the case of your body, it's going to bind to salt and calcium. So whatever you have in your system, it's going to bind to.
So they've done studies with that as, making sure that it doesn't cause any of the negative health impacts that are commonly
Well,
attributed.
they found that at high levels, it does indeed cause those problems.
Okay.
So-
So it's basically the same as other fluoride as far as the results in the human body.
Right, you don't want to overdose on any form of fluoride. Even if it was natural, because that's what the Colorado stain incident was, because of the naturally occurring. And even in Africa, they have issues with the same thing where the rock itself, that the water is sitting in their aquifer system, is heavy in fluoride, so that particular area has a big issue with skeletal fluorosis and dental fluorosis.
Address something. On the dental fluorosis, the CDC states that nationwide it's approximately 41% of young, I think it's, let's say 9 to 13-year-olds are showing evidence of dental fluorosis. It usually occurs not so much in utero, but from birth to about 8 years old when the teeth are being formed. In uterus too, because some are born with teeth. But up to 8 years old is when the teeth would be affected. It's when they're developing. In other words, it's not after they've erupted it through the skin. So I think I had another point, but I forgot.
But you can present that.
Okay. And I want to make...
Hold on.
One more
Yeah.
question. Quick question about organic versus the chemical fluorosis. They're both offered. Is there a cost difference between them? Or is it huge?
Yes, there's a cost
Huge?
Okay.
So they're using the cheaper
Oh, of course.
substance?
Yeah.
Okay.
There are unintended side effects of most anything. And I recall when we first moved here, Melbourne was having problems with, and I think it was chloramines. They put chlorine in the water to disinfect it, but then the chlorine interacts with organic material and is carcinogenic. And so they had to do some adjustments, as I recall. I'm talking probably 30 years ago. Did you come across anything that talks about what other things fluoride, if chloride does that, fluoride absolutely will. Fluoride's more aggressive than chloride. So that's one question, is whether there are any reports of other problems with fluoride, it being in the water. One thing I'm interested in, I can't remember the numbers. You showed the naturally occurring numbers in our water supply versus the standard.
0.2 milligrams per liter versus 0.35 milligrams per liter in the surface water and groundwater, and then the additional 0.6 to 0.7 is added. So putting those two together, you'll get a total of about 0.9 milligrams per liter, which is under the World Health Organization standard. So even with the naturally occurring and the chemically added, it's still under the recommended World Health Organization.
Okay. I guess the thing would be, and I'm not sure that it'd be available, is if you have a lower concentration that lowers the problem of fluorosis,
but to some degree may lower the efficacy of what you're adding. But I'm wondering just how big an effect that is. It could be that with 0.01, everything's fine, it does its job, and the rest of it's basically, a waste. So,
How low can you go?
and still be effective, yes, because,
Goes to the point of update.
yeah, Melbourne could have the option of saying, we'll just leave it in there. And it's kind of like, but not the same, as they have a problem on the base, because the natural arsenic levels on the Cape are higher than the national standard for exposure to arsenic in soils, which means, in theory, you'd have to scrape the whole Cape, put it in a dump someplace, and find clean, and so it gets silly.
The sands, so you wouldn't be not getting the dirt.
No, I'm talking about
Right.
natural exposures.
The levels in the sediments.
Melbourne actually shows that we have like 0.52 or something.
I have the water report here.
Oh, okay.
So,
Different conversation.
yeah, but anyway, the point is that there is, if they didn't add anything, it would still be there.
Right.
There'd be some there.
That's,
And the
I can
question
actually
is,
speak to that.
how effective would that be?
I have purchased a fluoride meter myself, and so we have been doing, got my family here, a lot of different testing. We have what type of well we have? Artesian well. So we've checked his artesian well, about 0.2, 0.3, that's what we would expect. No idea. The home was built in the 60s, so we don't know. Probably. No, it would be calcium fluoride. Sodium fluoride even is a man-made thing. Calcium fluoride is the only thing that occurs naturally in the earth. Sodium fluoride is a pharmaceutical. It's a pharmaceutical grade that's used in dental products. And that was, I think, what was originally used in a lot of the testing that was done back in the 40s and 50s. Hydrofluorosilicic acid is, we can call it a toxic waste product or a toxic byproduct. Either way, it is toxic and hazardous. And if there wasn't a consumer market for it, it would have to be disposed as a hazardous chemical, and it would have to pay to dispose of it. So, yeah, I'll go ahead and start.
Before she starts.
I did want to just address, though, John's comments about, I don't know if anyone here went to the utilities workshop. I know, Courtney, you were there. But when Mr. Ralph Rigglesberger was here, he talked about how they process the water for the city of Melbourne. And I don't know in what year they did it, but now they do reverse osmosis when they take the water from their sources, and the sources are either Lake Washington or deep water wells. Well, when you run things through reverse osmosis, that's about as good as you can get. I think distillation is the only thing you can do better. And again, with our testing that we've been doing with reverse osmosis water, it takes the fluoride content down to 0 on my meter. So it does a very good job getting fluoride out of the water, and that's why if you read things that are recommending you avoid fluoride for whatever reason, they're going to recommend typically reverse osmosis or distillation. And so Mr. Rigglesberger said they use reverse osmosis first on the water, then they treat it, and then they put it out to the water distribution system. But here's my question, and I've got a note into the city. There'll be some follow-up, but it does say, did anyone else get their water report?
Yeah.
Okay, and it's available online if you do an internet search of the Melbourne City Annual Water Quality Report. So the fluoride that's in our water, it says erosion of natural deposits discharged from fertilizer and aluminum factories. Well, that's gone because they do reverse osmosis. So that would be taken to 0. So then the second part says is water additive which promotes strong teeth when at optimal level of 0.7 parts per million. So the only fluoride we're getting in our water, I would think, based on that information, is from the hydrofluorosilicic acid that's added. But another thing that's interesting is arsenic, which John, you've mentioned here, it shows 0.52 parts per million. That's a pretty high number because the maximum goal for that is 0 set by EPA. So you're talking 0.52, that's pretty high when we're talking 0.7 is where we're at on fluoride. So where's the arsenic coming from? Well, we know, like I'm saying to you, hydrofluorosilicic acid is created by, when the emissions were coming out of the smokestacks, especially, I'll talk to the phosphate industry because that's what we have mostly in the South and especially in the state of Florida. It was literally wiping out local crops, from the smoke or fumes or whatever you want to call it, and it was crippling cattle. You mentioned skeletal fluorosis. It was crippling the cattle because they were getting so much of it. And we watched some documentaries on it, and ladies, this is back in the 60s and 70s, that were going to work in pantyhose. It was literally eating the pantyhose off their legs. They had a pantyhose budget so they could reimburse ladies for the pantyhose that were being eaten off their legs as they walked from their car into the office. So they found if they sprayed water on it, they could contain the fumes, emissions, whatever you want to call them, and it generates this product, if you will, called hydrofluorosilicic acid. Now, if you want to look at, I'm not a chemist, but if you want to look at chemistry, calcium fluoride is CaFT. That means it's 1 atom of calcium, 2 atoms of fluorine. Okay, that's what occurs naturally in rocks. Sodium fluoride, which is a pharmaceutical product that's used for dental treatment, its symbol is NaF. So we've got an atom of sodium and an atom of fluorine. Hydrofluorosilicic acid, H2SiF6. So we've got 2 atoms of hydrogen, some silicate, and 4 atoms of fluorine. And it is, again, a man-made product. You'll never find hydrofluorosilicic acid in nature. It doesn't exist. And my husband, John, is going to talk more just to that product. He has OSHA experience and is familiar with safety data sheets and things like that. So afterwards, he'll talk to that. But when I originally presented to the city of Melbourne, I had a list of pros and cons, somewhere. My only pro was, I said, may contribute to the reduction in dental caries when applied topically. In 1999, the CDC indicated that fluoride has its primary benefits to the teeth when applied topically and not from ingesting. And I never had been able actually to find the document that told that. And I, again, facts, want to back things up with facts. So here it is, 1999 CDC document, found it online today finally. And it says, as far as biological mechanism, fluoride's caries preventive properties initially were attributed to changes in enamel during tooth development, what we were talking about while the baby is developing teeth, because of the association between fluoride and cosmetic changes in enamel, which you were talking about, the Colorado staining, and a belief that fluoride incorporated into enamel during tooth development would result in a more acid-resistant mineral. However, this is the CDC. Laboratory and epidemiologic research suggest that fluoride prevents dental caries predominantly after reduction of the tooth into the mouth, and its actions primarily are topical for both adults and children. That's from the CDC. And I've been looking for that hard ever since, so I could present the document that shows that. Okay, the items I had against it, and we'll start going through the what Dylan has pulled together here. But I had causes dental fluorosis. Okay, the CDC's own documentation shows that in the latest documentation they have is from 2011, shows 41% of children, I don't have the exact figures, let's say from 8 to 13, have some form of dental fluorosis. And that number had gone up from like 29% in the previous study period, which was like from 1986 to 1989. And there's no more recent data on that. Causes skeletal fluorosis. Again, we'll go through this, but I just want to very quickly cover these things. They now know that, we know another for a fact, when you consume fluoride, the kidney can only eliminate about 50% of it. So the other for 50% is stored, like you said, Nick, mostly in bones, in teeth, and the pineal gland that we'll discuss too. But, and it actually is a hardship on people that have kidney problems, and such so the National Kidney Association they no longer use fluoridated water for dialysis. because they actually unfortunately had some deaths because of it. It's very hard on the kidneys. But when that gets stored in the bones, it creates arthritis-like conditions. And from the CDC website, osteoarthritis pain and problems is the #1 reason for workplace absence right now. So I'll move on. Reduce the thyroid function. I know I told my own story. That's how this all started. My own story was, I was diagnosed with hypothyroidism. I chose not to take Synthroid. I took all sources of fluoride. I use fluoride-free toothpaste, everything, shower filter, the whole 9 yards. Really tried to I don't take baths anymore much. Don't swim in the pool much, but anyway, what happened by just doing that, I completely brought my thyroid function back into the perfect range. So there's other recent studies. I wasn't able to pull everything together, but I can send anyone. There's recent human studies that show that fluoride does depress thyroid function. May contribute to cancer. I said may. There's a Harvard study, and it's referenced in Dylan's reference. It was a woman, a researcher there. She was going for her doctorate, so this is her research study. And it was she found a direct correlation between fluoride intake and the increased incidence of bone cancer in adolescent young adult males. And it was the Harvard School of Dental School, and it was a 2001 study. We'll flip through that too. Let me see. This is to me the most important thing right now. Studies have linked fluoride with reduced IQ in children, and there is some very recent information on that we used, human people, a 12-year study, a multi-million-dollar study. The people who were the sample, I guess you would say, for this research were in Mexico. It was funded by the U.S. National Institute of Health under the Health and Human Services Department, U.S. National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences, and the EPA. And what they found, they ran tests between women while they were pregnant, the amount of fluoride in their urine, and then their offspring. And they followed this up to the offspring's age of 12. And what they found, there was a direct correlation between fluoride exposure and reduced IQ. And this study here is the start of some lawsuits. There's one lawsuit right now pending against the EPA because of this lawsuit. And like I said, I've tried to find things that I thought would have the most support weight. This is a Harvard study here, and I didn't have time to print these things out, but it says researchers from Harvard School of Public Health for the first time combined 27 studies and found strong indications that fluoride might adversely affect cognitive development in children. Based on these findings, the authors say that the risks should not be ignored and that more research on fluoride's impact on the developing brain is warranted. Now, this was from 2012, and the last study that I'm talking about completed in September of 2017, the one that's funded by the U.S. This is a Harvard study. It says the average loss in IQ was reported as a standardized weighted mean difference of 0.45, which equates to about 7 IQ points. Some studies suggested that even slightly increased fluoride exposure could be toxic to the brain. Thus, children in high fluoride areas had significantly lower IQ scores than those that lived in low fluoride areas. And this is a quote from one of the researchers. Fluoride seems to fit in with lead, mercury, and other poisons that cause chemical brain drain. So, all right, you want to start flipping through, Dylan? We talked about, we're going to go quickly through these. We've talked about the city spends about $57,000 just on the hydrofluorosilicic acid, but that doesn't include the man hours for the application of the product into the water system or the testing. They test it apparently every day or so. And it doesn't include any protective equipment. It has to be handled as a hazardous material. It's not an essential nutrient for any organ in the body. We could go the rest of our lives without fluoride. Of course, we are going to get some because in its naturally occurring form of calcium fluoride, which is a totally different chemical compound. We are going to get some, but there's no functional use for it in our bodies. It's not necessary for life. And here again, there's never been a single randomized clinical trial to demonstrate fluoridation's effectiveness or safety. I want to stop right there because I did find just recently that, a document that says that the EPA has never tested any of the hydrofluorosilicic acids for human consumption. So I have that letter here. It's from the Environmental Protection Agency. And there's been none since. I think this is dated 2000. So to answer your question on whether we have in our possession empirical scientific data on the effects of fluorosilicic acid or sodium silicofluoride, all these are the synonyms for hydrofluorosilicic acid, on health and behavior, our answer is no. So the EPA has never studied the safety of hydrofluorosilicic acid, and I also contacted myself, the FDA, on 3 occasions, and they have never tested or approved hydrofluorosilicic acid as an additive to public water supplies. Again, fluoridation is not necessary, and there'll be several charts on this. I just watched a documentary on what's called the Child Smile program in Scotland, where they start with kids in kindergarten and up, and they just teach them how to brush their teeth and take care of their teeth. They don't fluoridate in Scotland. They've got really good rates of good dental health without fluoridation. It's all because of educating the population on how to care for the teeth. And these are the rates. We looked at the charts. This is a different chart. It's showing, and it's the World Health Organization is still recommending fluoridation, but it kind of goes against their own charts that are showing that dental decay decline is the same in both fluoridated and non-fluoridated areas. There's no discernible difference in those areas. And like I said, Scotland has got great dental health because they've started this Child Smile program where they're teaching kids at a young age how to care for their teeth. Okay. And we can look at study after study after study of whether fluoridation is doing anything to the teeth. Most every study I've looked at, and I've literally been studying this for about 4 or 5 months now, they don't show that fluoridation in the water does anything to assist in, against dental decay. And I'm just going to say this, there's, in my opinion, nothing good that happens to the body once you swallow the water. That's when a lot of problems start. Again, the same way, there's not a good correlation between any water fluoridation and the reduced dental decay. Now, this one is getting a lot of attention. Alveda King and Andrew Young, remember, I don't know if these names mean anything to you, but they're very active in minority and low-income areas, and they've actually started writing letters. Andrew Young has written a letter to the state of Georgia, and actually, he's former Orlando Mayor. He was also ambassador to the UN, I believe. But anyway, it's getting a lot of attention. The problem, it's not the water fluoridation is not reducing dental decay in the low-income and minority areas, and instead they're having problems with dental fluorosis. Okay, go on. Again, when we have areas where fluoridation is stopped, there's no discernible difference, so you don't see that tooth decay goes up. This is one thing I did want to talk about, because we can talk about parts per million in the water, but and John will talk about this a little bit, but what we don't realize, it's in everything anymore. It's in beer, it's in wine. If you buy a can of creamed corn, if the can of creamed corn was made in a fluoridated community, it's got fluoride in it. And the thing is, fluoride doesn't boil out. It's not like chlorine. You can get chlorine to evaporate or boil out. Fluoride actually doesn't boil out, so like if you condense a gravy or a sauce or something like that, it actually becomes more concentrated. So the parts per million are going to go up if you concentrate something. And if it's in not only the water you're drinking, but if you purchase beverages, beer, wine, sodas, whatever, foods, then there's no way to control the dose. You can control maybe parts per million that are in a water source, but there's no way to control the dose that the person ingests. And there's a lot of the scientists now that just believe that dental fluorosis is a visible sign of damage that's going on in other places in the body as well. And this is what I think is right now the most important thing. It is, fluoride is being, and you can do internet searches, it's being recognized even in the psychiatric realms, and all the brain researches. Phyllis Molinex did some research back, it's been a while back now, but she actually, and these were animal, it was rats, but it showed that the fluoride caused hyperactivity. There's some scientists that believe, again, these are things that can't necessarily be proved for certain, but believe, they really do feel that without any doubt it's a neurotoxin. They believe it could be responsible for things like ADHD, hyperactivity, possibly autism, things of that nature, because more and more the research is showing, and this last research that finished in September is showing that fluoride is a neurotoxin, especially to children. And the effect of the pineal gland, because we talked about how fluoride stores in the body, and it actually can accumulate in this thing, and I may not be pronouncing it wrong, pineal, I've heard it pronounced different ways, but one thing that the pineal gland does for us is it creates melatonin. So melatonin is the chemical our body naturally creates so that we can sleep at night. So if we're not getting that, you know, we may not be sleeping at night. I'm curious to see when drugs like Sominex, over-the-counter things, came into play. And of course, there's other factors why people don't sleep. But we know for sure it causes a decrease in the melatonin production when the pineal gland becomes calcified with fluoride. And there's also interesting research that shows in fluoridated areas that young girls reach menstruation earlier. So it's changing the biomechanical systems in females, that they are maturing earlier than girls in non-fluoridated areas. I don't think they understand exactly the mechanism biologically that's causing that, but they can actually see that in research that they do. And again, this is where I came in with this is how it all started with me. And I want to say, I know I took statistics and probability in college, so I understand I'm talking about a very small sample set, but in my own family, the 4 of us that are over 50 that live local and I've been here since '62. Water started being fluoridated since '66. We're 4 for 4 having hyperthyroidism in my family, even with one, I'm not talking about all blood relatives either, and all being prescribed Synthroid, which Synthroid, he has there 2010, it was like the second most, it's the most prescribed medication in the U.S. and has been since like 2013, 2014. And I did do some research to see how we compared with other countries, and it was really difficult to find. Italy's not fluoridated, and I did find that like their top 3 were mostly cholesterol medications. I found it really hard to find, but I can tell you in the United States that Synthroid is and has been for the last 4 or so years the most prescribed medication in the United States. And again, this one is really near and dear to my heart too, because I have a lot of friends now as I'm in my mid-50s that are fighting symptoms of arthritis where they can't work out, they can't walk, they can't do whatever. And I don't know other than there have been some bone biopsies done, but other than a very painful bone biopsy, it's hard to tell exactly how much fluoride has accumulated in the bones, but it is a fact, we're going back to facts now, that the body can only get rid of 50% of the fluoride you ingest, and the rest does store itself, and mostly in the bones, the teeth, and the pineal gland. So what they theorize, and they can see it on x-rays, is when the fluoride builds up in the bones, it creates like a rough texture, which causes pain, and it creates an osteoarthritic type pain, and like I said, the CDC now says that type of pain is the #1 reason that people for workplace absence right now. And that's kind of the same. It can be seen on x-rays. I've looked at lots of x-rays where you can actually see the fluoride accumulation. Now this is interesting because originally, the same way they originally thought that fluoride might be helpful when ingested during the process while the teeth were being developed in the body, and they found out that was not the case. They actually thought that fluoride, since it accumulates in bones, might help make bones stronger, and especially like in elderly people. So they did some studies where they kind of megadosed some of our elder population in these studies, and what they found was exactly the opposite. I mean, yes, it did accumulate, but the mechanism turned out to be it made the bones more brittle. And so they actually saw a higher incidence of hip fractures with these people that had been treated with fluoride. And again, this goes back to the study. There's a lot of studies, but the main thing that they have been able to find a direct correlation is with with higher concentrations, and I'm just talking about from drinking water in the United States. This one I referred to, the Harvard study, was in the United States, in areas that were just typically fluoridated. So, you know, we're not talking about excessive amounts of fluoride. There was a direct correlation between the higher the level of fluoride, the higher the incidence of bone cancer in these adolescent and young adult males. And, you know, you can go online and find the research, read the paper, read these scientific papers, but that one was a Harvard study that I'm referring to on that bone cancer study. Now, I haven't studied as much. Dylan did more of this. I've heard about this. I haven't dove into it, but there's some concerns that it'll lower the sperm count in males and things of that nature. There says they found evidence of reproductive toxicity in fluoride-exposed rats. So I don't know much about that, but I have heard that it can cause reproductive problems. And this is what we've already discussed. The hydrofluoric acid is not pharmaceutical grade, and that's what I was mentioning here. If the water comes out of the water sources and it runs through reverse osmosis, it should be pretty pure. So if it's coming out and showing arsenic and barium is on there too, what I didn't really make clear is when they do that thing where they spray the water on the smokestacks, I mean, as far as I know, and I haven't asked the City of Melbourne, is there any testing, like random testing of the samples that we get of the hydrofluorosilicic acid? And in the water report, they only test for lead at the tap. And they're suggesting that any lead contamination we see at the tap, meaning in our homes, is caused by lead pipes or lead soldering. But, you know, I would like to see it tested at the source, because if the hydrofluorosilicic acid is coming to us and it's contaminated with arsenic and lead and barium, that's a problem. And again, I do want to hit on this because the City of Melbourne asked me specific questions that I got them answers to, because, you know, there are the American Dental Association, the EPA, the CDC, all these organizations. Well, the American Dental Association, we have to remember, is a trade organization, just like the National Home Builders and Contractors, just like the National Association of Realtors. They will do things somehow that benefit their own industry, and I've really tried to avoid saying that in anything I've said, but it's just a fact if we're talking about facts. The American Dental Association gets a tremendous amount of money each year for their endorsements. You know, you see it on the tube of toothpaste or mouthwash endorsed by the American Dental Association. They get a lot of money for those endorsements. So just because they endorse it does not mean it's fact. And a matter of fact, the American Dental Association, now you can go on their website. You have to dig for it. But you look around and see, how can I protect my baby from dental fluorosis? They recommend not using fluoridated water to mix infant formula. They recommended not allowing a child to have fluoridated water up to the age of 8. 8. To avoid dental fluorosis. And I printed all that out for the City of Melbourne. The EPA considers, and if you look at your water report, fluoride is showed as a contaminant. So it's either, is it a contaminant or is it a medicine? So the EPA, all they do is try to basically figure out the amount that probably won't hurt you too bad. So the CDC has a similar warning. Again, you have to dig for it about avoiding ingestion of fluoride while the tooth is being developed up to the age of 8. You have to dig for these things, but they're on their websites. So again, just because the American Dental Association endorsed water fluoridation, they also have information on their website quite to the contrary if you dig for it. And I'll be glad to share that information, those website links. And I do have a letter. Again, I would like, if I had time to, I didn't have time to make copies, and it's very small print, but back in 1999, EPA Headquarters Union of Scientists wrote a formal letter opposing fluoridation, and I have it here. And at the time, they had 1,500 members, and that was so 1,500 members of the Environmental Protection Agency wrote a letter, a formal letter against fluoridation. And I have, you know, of course, a lot of research. I've been doing this forever, but there's one gentleman who had, you know, a doctorate in chemistry and became the professor emeritus. Say it for me. Thank you. at the University of Kansas, and he started this whole thing just like I did. He suddenly starts having thyroid issues. So he does his own research, he starts drinking distilled water. He goes to the doctor, and after he's done this for a while and has it tested again, and now his thyroid's fine. And that set him on a journey that he became the editor-in-chief of a magazine called Fluoride, and he was, as far as I know, the editor-in-chief until he died at the age of 85 in 2013. So, I mean, he's as high as you get as far as chemistry, credentials, and he was very much opposed to it. So more and more, the scientists are coming on board to oppose fluoridation. And let me just see if I have any other notes here that I wanted to say. Yes, we hear a lot about the 2006, it's cited if you do any research on the topic at all, the National Research Council report in 2006 on fluoride in the drinking water. And it was a 12-member, I would almost use the term bipartisan, it was just a group of very different people and scientists. And their summary on the front page, and again, this is an 800-page document that I have downloaded, and we'll be glad to send to anyone who wants it. It says, the committee broke new ground declaring severe dental fluorosis and moderate stage 2 skeletal fluorosis adverse health effects, and by noting that the current standard of 4 milligrams of fluoride per liter in drinking water does not protect against bone fractures or severe dental fluorosis, silicofluorides were said to need health effects testing, which has never been done. That's never been done. The NRC review includes extensive information on other possible health effects of fluoride, such as endocrine effects and effects on the brain, which we've talked about. On the basis of this information and the proper interpretation of the SDWA, which I'm not sure what that means, the following are all adverse health effects. And they list them: moderate dental fluorosis, stage 1 skeletal fluorosis, arthritis with joint pain and stiffness, this is in what they've written, decreased thyroid function, again, this is the National Research Council, and detrimental effects on the brain, especially in conjunction with aluminum, because there's a lot of researchers that also believe that fluoride might be associated with Alzheimer's and dementia too, especially if it's in conjunction with aluminum. The amount of fluoride necessary to cause these effects to susceptible members of the population is at or below the dose received from current levels of fluoride recommended for water fluoridation. I'm going to read that again. The amount of fluoride necessary to cause these effects to susceptible members of the population is at or below the dose received from current levels of fluoride recommended for water fluoridation. The recommended maximum contaminant level goal, that's MCLG, I saw that on your slides too, for fluoride in drinking water should be 0. And again, that's the United States National Research Council report, Fluoride in Drinking Water, stated 2006. So I'd be glad to answer any questions that you have, if I can. If not, I'll be glad to try to research and get back with you. I will just say that my family will tell you I've been doing a lot of research, 4 to 6 months worth of research. Let me just bring up one other thing, which may seem off the topic, but it's not to me. So this book has just come out. It came out May 8th. It's called The Hidden Cause of Acne. It was written by an author who's an FBI analyst. She has a heart for research. That's what she does. And I myself had cystic acne for 35 years. And what happened is when my thyroid messed up and I went off all fluoride, suddenly my face cleared up. And I even was going at that point, I did it all. I did Accutane when I was 46. I did every, Proactive, benzoyl peroxide, antibiotics, you name it, I did it. When I went off all fluoride substances, and this has only been in the last 5 years, I would guess, my face cleared up. My skin cleared up, my chest, my back, everything. And I went to the woman I was working with at the time, an esthetician, and I said to her, I think it's the fluoride. And of course, people would think I was nuts. Well, this lady's come out, she was a Rhodes Scholar, I think I'm saying that right. She ended up in Scotland for a master's degree. She was there, beautiful skin, no problems. She comes back within 2 weeks of getting back to the United States, and she had it much, much worse than I ever did. So she's written this. It's a great book. It has a lot about all kinds of things. It makes you understand why that fluoride causes suppress thyroid function. It all has to do with the halogen class chemicals and the periodic table that you were talking about, where we don't have enough iodine in our diet. We know iodine is necessary for proper thyroid function. That's why we have iodized salt now. But fluoride actually kind of takes the place of iodine once it goes into our bodies, displaces it is the word. And that is, I think, the main mechanism that causes us to have suppressed thyroid function when we ingest fluoride. So I think that's all I have for right now.
Thank you very much. You did a lot of research, and we appreciate that. Do we have any questions?
I have a few.
Yes.
Just like I asked Nick, is everything that you presented to us, other than when you specifically stated a type of fluoride, does that relate to both types of fluoride, or is it just the specific hydrofluorosilicic acid?
Well, hydrofluorosilicic acid is used in 90% of the waters that, Nick was talking about. 90% of the waters that are fluoridated in the United States use that chemical. So, in referring just to ourselves, like I was referring to, if what Mr. Rigglesberger said is correct, which I believe it to be, he's the director of Public Works, that the water they're drawing out of the earth and out of the lake is going through reverse osmosis. That takes the fluoride down to basically zero. So the only fluoride that we're getting here in the Melbourne area in our tap is hydrofluorosilicic acid. And I would suggest also, when I'm talking about it's in your canned foods, it's in the beverages you buy, it's in other things, it all depends on where they're made, where they're manufactured, and if they treat the water before they bottle or can the product. But 90% of the United States is using hydrofluorosilicic acid, so odds are that if you're also ingesting it from food or drink, that's the product, that's the chemical that will be in the product.
Well, the reason that I'm asking is, we have the potential to vote for the city to remove that, but if the recommendation is that, we can still get the benefits if we go with, like, real fluoride, rather than this form, are the issues that you're listing specific to this?
No. It's what I've told you about, like Nick was saying, it's about the fluorine ion. And the fluorine, we'll call it, fluoride, and I'm not a chemist, but I have been studying quite a bit of it. There are places in, I believe you said Africa, but also in India and China, where there's too much naturally occurring calcium fluoride in the water. And if you look, there's a documentary on YouTube, it's called Crippling Waters. Those people are literally, some of them bent over. Like we talk about, it starts with just arthritic type symptoms. But if they get enough, it will literally deform the bones. And so, yes, the answer to your question is, if you are exposed to too much fluoride in whatever form, it can be very harmful ingested. And I think it's just really important to note that when we have all kinds of availability for fluoride products if you want to use them topically. And SNAP, WIC, EBT, you can get fluoridated dental products, toothpaste, mouth rinse, whatever. I've checked the dental services, county dental services, they offer fluoride treatments. If you want to get fluoride on your teeth, there's a lot of ways, but the bottom line is once you swallow, it causes havoc in your body, and it just does. If you choose to use it topically or not, that's your choice.
Oh, I'm sorry, I just have two more things.
Go for it.
One, I thought it was worth mentioning, because I didn't hear it come up here, but I did read it along the way, that in many of the countries that don't add fluoride to their water, they do add fluoride either to milk or to salt, but that in those places,
And the same as we do iodized salt here.
Right, exactly.
And
so
you can
people have the option.
choose to use it or not.
But I just thought that was worth mentioning because it didn't come out. And the other thing, this is a question for you and for Nick, and obviously anybody else in the room that may or may not know the answer to this question. I think that because this has come specifically to the Sustainability Board, we're really talking a lot about the effects that this has on humans. But, another thing that I came across is how much of the water that comes to our homes that we don't actually drink.
Right.
And so that ends up going into other things. So, we water our plants with this. We, feed this to our dogs, and, the fish swim in it. Obviously, it ends up in the lagoon. So how much do we know about the health effects of fluoridating our water on our lagoon, specifically all of the wildlife and plants that live there?
I have done some research on it. That's when I came to Courtney the first day to tell her that I'd gone and spoken before the city of Melbourne, and I had some concerns too about the environmental impacts. And to answer the first question, only 1/2% of the water delivered to the homes is actually ingested by humans or even dogs or animals. And there's a lot of research. There's a documentary called Poison Horses, where these people moved to this beautiful horse farm, and months after they fluoridated the water source, and they ended up losing several horses and several dogs because of and they actually then sent them away and had it tested, and they had died of fluoride poisoning. So anyway, that answers that. It does affect our animals, and they're much smaller than we are, and it does affect them. The other part is there's not been any research done, and research takes a lot of money and many years sometimes locally. I did send a picture to Nick about, like, even when we empty a swimming pool, which happens all the time. In the picture I sent, this, you know how they bring it out, and there's the barrel with the holes in it, and it was right beside the inlet to the storm sewer. I mean, it was sitting right beside it. So whatever's in that pool, if that pool's been recently filled or topped with tap water, you know, municipal water, that's going to go right in the lagoon. I know of no studies locally that show. There's a lot of studies in the Northwest where they were around some type of plant, like aluminum plant or something like that. The salmon quit spawning. They just didn't care to go up the river. There's a lot of studies in the Northwest. I know of no studies locally, and that's what I'd originally spoken to Courtney about, because when you see the fire hydrants and they open them to purge them or whatever, a lot of times the fire hydrants are right beside a storm sewer, so our tap water is just going, you know, right in. Every time you pressure wash your driveway, wash your car, all that tap water is going into our sewer systems, which eventually go into the canals and the lagoon.
So the EPA hasn't done any studies?
No.
I got a quick question, because something that Nick said made me a little curious. You were saying back in the past that they used this acid to find leaks, which makes me think that it's different in certain areas. Like when we're getting these statistics, when we're using these statistics for parts per million and so forth, is that the parts per million installed at the plant? How much of that actually gets to our house, and is it different in different areas?
I've only done one tap. That was my son's house. He lives in Sally Beach, and in the Sally Beach area, and it was 0.7, his tap water. So I haven't done multiple sources. I do know, like at Lake Shepherd, I don't know if anybody saw what was going on at Lake Shepherd, but I guess they're building maybe a new lift station or something there. I don't know. But, I mean, they've been just flowing the water out. And I went and took a sample, but I haven't had the time to see it. I did see they had hooked up to one of the fire hydrants one day and were pumping that water out again, probably to flush something out. But there was water running there for weeks. I don't know if anybody saw it, but it filled up the ditches by South Patrick.
That's almost certainly groundwater.
That could have been groundwater.
They're working in those lift stations, they're working probably 10 feet below the top of the water table.
I agree. Those are probably, but they were using some. I would just happen to be driving by one day, and the fellow had hooked up to the fire hydrant there at Lake Shepherd, and somehow they were using additional water, maybe just to flush something or something, but they were using tap water too, or municipal water, I should say.
Does that answer your question?
Sure. But it'd be interesting to know how much is that the tap.
It should be the same. It comes from the city of Melbourne, it's applied and it's tested, and that should be the same temperature level. That's why they put that on there.
It need not be the case. If it binds up with something on the way, it's gone.
If there's a leak across town and all the fluoride's going over there.
No, the fluoride concentration won't change because it goes out with the water. But if they're, let's say, organic material that it clings to, and that doesn't come out of your tap, then you lose it. I don't have any questions at this point. I do have some comments. Number one, I would certainly steer away from any endorsements, either pro or con. I recall some time ago, a very prominent scientist named Timothy Leary, who was promoting the idea of using LSD. You can get a scientist that's really good, and they kind of go off down some rabbit trail someplace. And so endorsements really don't. Now, when you're citing studies, especially if they're published in a peer-reviewed journal,
Yes.
now you're getting to something that could be useful. And as such, I'd be interested in seeing developed at some point probably something that would be kind of like a bibliography that by categories what each document addresses, such as the disrupting the endocrine system, which is the problems with
The thyroid?
developing sexual characteristics, about fluorosis and whatever else, the good and the bad, and the ugly if it's there. The other thing that seems to me that would be easy and presumably not terribly expensive is to get some of this material from Melbourne and send it to a lab and give a list of things you want: barium, sodium, mercury. Go down the list. I think EPA has their top 10 or something like that. There may be others that you want to think of. You're not talking tens of dollars, but you're not talking thousands of dollars either. And if you do just one sample, it's probably not enough, but I would start with one sample to see if anything triggers. I mean, I thought there was going to be a lot of phosphorus in artesian water. So Public Works helped me. We went out and collected a bunch of samples, got the lab work done, below detection standards. So what you think may be there may not be there. But if you do the test and you're finding some of this stuff popping up, then that might be a trigger to say maybe we need, or maybe Melbourne needs to look at some of this, because it may not be fluoride that causes some of the trouble. I can't imagine the folks working in an industrial plant are sitting there and saying, well, you know, this has to be pure water. They're probably pumping groundwater from who knows where that contains who knows what, because they're not drinking it. It's an industrial process. So that's one possibility. And I really would be real uncomfortable making any assertions other than we don't know very much before taking a position. I'd really like to see a good bibliography, and that may be a place to start, is to develop a list of things in good documentation, and then having a sit down with folks with Melbourne Utilities and say, we've got these concerns, would you like to take a look at this and address it one way or the other? And it may be a stack of paper that high, but you know, that you take each document that you reference. If it's an 800-page study, it's an 800-page study, and you stick them behind it.
I pretty much have done what you're suggesting. I have sent to both Mr. Rigglesberger and Mr. McNeese, who's the city manager, a tremendous amount of documentation. And I've presented twice now to the city council, and again, followed up with letters, lots of information.
In a, what I would call, a reasonably easily digested form. I've learned I do not pass to council a document this thick.
I tried, believe me.
If it's more than one page, it may not get read.
But this topic is really hard to address in one page. It really is.
But you can lead one into it.
I'd be glad to send you what I've sent to the council, and you can, you know, You can see what's been shared with them. I do think I made a mistake the first time. I talked to Dylan about it. But it was like a 35-page document that I gave to him. You only get 3 minutes when you're speaking in public comments because it was not an agenda item. And so just a lead in and a request for them to do their own research. And I found that I'm just being honest here, they were hesitant to do their own research. They really wanted to rely on Mr. Riegelsberger and Mr. McNeese. And the last meeting that my husband John and I both spoke at, council members did say that they would do some of their own research. There's one council person who is adamantly opposed and was one of those 2 dissenting votes that I mentioned. The other dissenting votes, the person is rolled off and is no longer on the council. But there's one person who's adamantly opposed to fluoridation and has done a lot of research on it. I did one thing I had forgotten to mention is when we were talking about organizations, the American Academy of Immunology, the American Academy of Diabetes, the American Cancer Society, the American Diabetes Association, the American Nurses Association, the American Psychiatric Association, and the National Kennedy Foundation and the Society of Toxicology have all removed their endorsement for fluoridation. And I have the document here that addresses that. So more and more, I think the word is getting out that I was asking the city of Melbourne, the one consideration one council member said is how he really wanted to think about if we were doing more harm than possible good. And there's a United Nations document that I referred to. It's called the Precautionary Principle. And it really outlines, and it talks about asbestos. And it said that they moved too slowly on asbestos. And now, you still see the ads on TV for, and I won't be able to pronounce it, mesothelioma. But I really believe that fluoride and fluoridation, fluoride addition to the water treatments will be removed at some point. It will be like a DDT, lead paint, lead gasoline, Agent Orange, and those things you think about that the people assumed were safe at one point and turned out not to be.
Just like plastic.
Any other questions? All right, so
One last question.
got one, okay.
Not attacking, I'm just curious. Have you done any other research to find out what might cause hypothyroidism? Have you done are there any other areas of interest like chemicals or something?
There may be. I mean, for me, when I removed that, my thyroid function went back to normal, so I didn't follow on. That was the cure for me, and I didn't take any prescription medication.
Okay.
So I'm sure there probably are other causes.
It's hereditary.
It's a big part of it.
Well, again, I say, my family.
And sex, gender.
Non-blood relatives.
Sorry.
Now, actually, that's a point, and you mentioned it, and I forgot to comment on it. Almost everything follows a bell curve. And some bell curves have very long tails. And you talk about averages, and that's what a lot of these standards are based on. But at some point, there is a part of the population that's going to be impacted. And that may be one focus if it's more than one person out of, 300 million or some ridiculous number, that especially if you can find that Melbourne's serving, probably 100,000 plus people. If it's 1/10 of 1%, that's 1,000th of 100,000. That's 100 people that are being impacted. And, at what point do you say, is this right? Especially if there's alternatives. So that's another tack to take if you're addressing it. It isn't maybe the average person that's the real concern. If you're not worried about the average person, what about these other people? And a lot of discussion there about up to the age of 8. I can understand in the low-income area, because I think a lot of those people probably, their diet's terrible.
And that affects how the fluoride affects their body.
I doubt that they're drinking water. They're probably drinking soda.
Well, I know of a person myself, a lady, and her husband unfortunately died unexpectedly last year, and she's really going through some financial difficulties, and they're drinking the tap, and she knows it's not good, that she can't afford, filters, they're expensive, and she can't afford bottled water, and she can't afford sodas. So there is that population that they don't have a choice but to drink the tap. So, I'm standing here before you, we have filtered water, I have filter on my shower, we're all doing great. We have a water service from my mom, delivery of filtered water, I've tested it, test zero fluoride. I mean, I've
But
tried
even
to
some of
protect.
the bottled water has fluoride in it.
Yes,
right?
I had a friend who says, oh, it's spring. I said, look at you, I've got everybody looking now. Look at your water. She says, oh, it's spring water. And then she goes, oh my gosh, it says it's fluoridated spring water. So they've taken spring water out of one of our Florida springs and put fluoride in it. So I just honestly believe that, nothing good happens when it's swallowed. The CDC says that the primary effects are topical. And so, why take a chance? And why take a chance with some really dangerous chemical? I don't think it's worth the risk myself.
I'm sorry, one more question.
Yes.
I'm very interested, because I told you I've had a little bit of this in my family. Have you found a relation with this fluoride, high fluoride, and hypothyroidism? Like, in your studies, have you found that areas that have high concentration of the fluoride have higher
I can't say that I've seen that exact study. Again, there was one that I didn't print out today that specifically addressed that. But it's so hard to tell. What seems a shame to me is when this process started in 1945 and through the 50s, and now you see the stats, 77% or whatever of municipal water systems are fluoridated. So in our modern medical time period, we don't, it's hard to say, like, what's causing what, in a way. I mean, I'm telling you that Synthroid is the #1 prescribed medication. I mean, I ask everybody now, what do you think is the number, and they'll guess all these different things, and I'm like, no, and I'm telling you, in my family, we're 4 for 4 of being diagnosed, and not all blood relatives, and being prescribed Synthroid. I declined the prescription and started, doing my own research. But I can look for that study. There was one recently, because I sent it to Mr. Riegelsberger and Mr. McNeese. It was a recent study that specifically showed the association between fluoride intake and...
It was a statistical study that was basically done across the world that showed rates of hyperthyroidism were significantly higher in areas with fluoridated water.
This is that epidemiology?
Yeah, it was a statistical epidemiology. It wasn't a clinical study. It was a statistical study.
I will state that there are also different types of hyperthyroidism. So like there's the Hashimoto's is an example. And Hashimoto's is an autoimmune disorder. And I don't know what the breakdown of that is compared to others, but it's going to have, like a different cause and a different reaction in the body. And I'm sure that probably generally when you read things about hypothyroidism, it's being lumped together. So that's, same thing like with diabetes. There's type 1 diabetes, there's type 2. Type 1 is an autoimmune disease. Type 2 can be hereditary or it can be diet and lifestyle. And 5% of diabetics are type 1. So it's very different impact and reaction in the body, but still two different types of things and two different types of causes.
Okay. Well, we certainly appreciate you bringing this to our attention, and you've asked us to take a stand on this.
My husband has some more comments too on a
Okay.
little bit different topic.
Okay. We're kind of running.
You can do it you can do it in 3 minutes. It's been done in Melbourne in 3 minutes.
I'm practiced because I got gavel. I'm glad to see that the gavel isn't active. Thank you again very much. Before I talk about what I'm going to talk about is, within the last couple of weeks, I saw an article. By the way, thanks both of you guys for putting those presentations together. Those were very, very informative. Within the last couple of weeks, I saw an article about non-stick cookware. Anybody see this recently? Parts per trillion. That the reason why non-stick works is fluorine. Fluorine is what's in the stuff that we used to treat carpets with. Scotchgard. That's what fluorine does. Nicholas talked about that, about it binds to things. Anyway, that was interesting because it was not a positive article. You don't want to use nonstick cookware because where does it end up? Where does it end up binding? In your liver, in your kidneys, and things like that. I think we can all appreciate the ability not to use that. Again, thank you very much for your service to our community, seriously. Unlike all other water treatment processes, fluoridation does not treat the water itself, but the person consuming it. Hydrofluorosilicic acid, what Melbourne uses, is used to treat you, your families, and your pets. Think about that. The FDA accepts that fluoride is a drug. Therefore, fluoridating water is mass medication. This is why there's a growing movement in American municipalities to end water fluoridation. 14 communities in the state of Florida have rejected water fluoridation just since 1990. And also why most Western European nations have rejected the practice. In their view, the public water supply is not an appropriate place to be adding drugs. Fluoridation, or any practice that uses the public water supply as a vehicle to deliver medicine, violates medical ethics in several key ways. It deprives the individual or his or her right to informed consent. Talked about that a little bit in your presentation, Nick. It's approved and delivered by people without medical qualifications. It's delivered to everyone, regardless of age, health, or nutritional status, without individual oversight by any doctor and without any control of dosage. We talked about that also. Fluoridation violates the principle of informed consent because no doctor can force a patient to take any medicine. According to the American Medical Association, the doctor must inform the patient of the medicine's benefits, side effects, and alternatives, and then allow the patient to decide whether to take the medicine or not. With water fluoridation, the City Council simply tell the individual that fluoridated water is good for them, and then proceed to add it to their drinking water irrespective of their consent. Fluoridation use allows government bodies the right to do to everyone what an individual doctor is prohibited to doing to anyone. We talked about the uncontrolled dose problem. Although water departments can generally control the concentration of fluoride being added to water, and my wife's studies have borne that out, they're pretty consistent in being able to, and they do a fantastic job. They take water out of Lake Washington and out of groundwater. It's a cheap product, and it's a whole lot of effort to get that to be a consistent product. However, they cannot control the dose that individuals receive. This is because the dose depends on two factors beyond their control. A, the water drinker's weight, my girlish figure, and the water drinker's thirst. The less an individual weighs, the greater the dose by body weight they will receive. That just makes sense. The uncontrolled dose that water fluoridation delivers stands in stark contrast to prescription drugs, which are very carefully dosed. It's a question I want you to ask yourselves. Should the City of Melbourne be making medical decisions for the local citizens to whom Melbourne water is supplied? Medical decisions. I'm not going to hand out copies, but I want to talk about the safety data sheet. In fact, if anybody wants this, we've got the safety data sheet from the company that produces this Harcross chemical. That is the chemical that the City of Melbourne uses, and that is the manufacturer. Just a couple points on this. I look at SDSs all day long, every day, it seems like. Toxicological information, the fluoride you add to our water, that they add to our water, this was a presentation I gave to Melbourne, is toxic in many ways, as we can see, but I want to key on one statement on the SDS. Acute toxicity, harmful if swallowed. Another thing that's not so happy, the information in any SDS indicates how long it takes for various test animals to die from either oral ingestion to inhalation of fumes, monkeys, rats, guinea pigs, etc. Nobody lasted more than about 30 minutes. There's been a very big push on for many years, and it's coming to a head now about the health of the Indian River Lagoon. The environmental precautions in the safety data sheet also indicate, quote, "avoid discharge into drains, water courses, or onto the ground." As we talked about earlier, when the fire hydrants are purged, when someone's pool is dumped, where does that go? Right down the storm sewers and into the lagoon, fluoridated, on its happy fluoridated way. So we are adding to our municipal water system a highly toxic and corrosive chemical that we would never allow to enter directly into our natural waterways. Any questions?
So if we were to outright ban fluoride, what would that picture kind of look like in terms of disposing of it? And I mean, it seems to be all over the place, or enough of it. Have you kind of thought about that flip side of it?
Hydrofluorosilicic acid has to be manufactured.
Right.
If the manufacturer of hydrofluorosilicic acid stops, then we talked about some alternatives to other types of fluoridation,
Right.
calcium fluoride, for instance. It's our choice as a culture to manufacture that chemical or not.
I thought it was a byproduct.
That's exactly what I was.
It's a byproduct of phosphate production. And the reason why it's used is because of the fluorine atom and the effectiveness that it's got. That doesn't mean it's the only way.
No, I think if the process, that what you're saying is, if fluoride was outlawed, and if the fluoridation of water can no longer happen, these companies would have to dispose of this product as a toxic waste product.
Right, yeah.
And they have to do this to capture the emissions, or they have to, because it was killing the crops and crippling the cattle in the nearby areas around the state of Florida. So if they don't have a market for it to sell, so they can, the term is the solution to pollution is dilution. In this case,
Right.
putting it into our public water system, they would have to pay, and I don't know what process that would be, and have it disposed of as a hazardous waste product, toxic product.
So our phosphate detergents would increase in price. That would be the end result of
Right.
having to add that cost. Pass that along to the consumer.
My next question is, if we've had other cities remove this from their systems, how did that happen? If we don't want to make medical decisions for people, did they vote on this? Did they put it on the ballot?
I don't have any information on how that
I mean,
happened.
that
The
seems
mechanism.
like, that seems like a mechanism, like putting it on a ballot, so to inform people. The city
Well,
council
the
can-
problem is that the city of Melbourne is a regional water supplier, just like most water suppliers. So they normally don't just supply to the one municipality that they have. I mean, one exception to that rule is the city of Titusville and Brevard County. But every other water supplier here supplies water outside of their municipal boundaries. So to put it on the ballot would have to be probably like a countywide initiative and apply to all of the water suppliers in the
Cocoa,
county.
Titusville,
Yeah,
Melbourne.
so in the other cities, it was a city council decision of that water supplier, you know, just like in, so, you know, they live in the city of Satellite Beach, but they have to go to the city of Melbourne to appeal to them because they run that utility. So that would be their
Right.
decision.
Indian
to
Harbor,
take it out.
Atlantic,
Right.
Melbourne Beach.
I would say that the cocoa facility is same numbers.
You say same numbers, what does that mean?
The same amount of what they get from the different area of groundwater surface water and what they actually put it. It's not very different.
They're using hydrofluorosilicic acid also.
It's also the same.
But the reverse osmosis takes the natural out anyway. So whatever's coming in is whatever's been added,
Right.
treated.
Right.
So
Do we know how many people, sorry, go ahead.
So if we made the recommendation, we would be making the recommendation to the city of Melbourne, not to our council.
You'd have to make it to our council, and our council would send a letter over to the city of Melbourne.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Well,
And just to let you know, I did speak with the city manager at one of our association meetings, or the assistant city manager, I should say, and she indicated that the city council, you know, she knows Ms. Palasama, I'm sorry, it's a hard name to pronounce, but, and she said that the staff doesn't really have a care either way, but they said that the city council really didn't want to open up the issue until the contract to
Right.
that particular company expired, which is in...
Park-Cross.
It's in 2 years. Yeah, it's in 2.5 years. So they would probably take it up, you know, the discussion next year
leading into
consistently, yeah.
the end of that contract.
Yeah.
We continue to, I'll say this, poison our citizens just because we have a contract that's not, that's what I've been fighting against. I understand, they said that and come up with a vote. At first, that's the first thing they said to me, so I wanted to, but if, and then one council person who's against it wanted to check into seeing if that contract could be canceled.
I would be shocked if they entered into any contract that couldn't be canceled right away. I mean, we don't. So, that's what, you have to have those types of contracts in a public sector environment.
Do we know how many people are receiving water from Melbourne Utilities?
I don't know what their total customer.
What would you say, 100,000?
All the population, it's,
160,000, I was reading about the iron.
yeah, that sounds about right.
160,000?
Yeah, I think 160, 170. And I think there's a Palmdale water, there's a Cocoa water, and Titus
Yeah.
water.
So they supply to Melbourne, West Melbourne, most of the beaches in the Atlantic, Palm Shores, and Sun Tree Riviera.
Right, Cocoa takes up the other part.
That's what it costs you a year.
Now, as far as staff and stuff, my experience, having in the past been involved with some water issues, is that those folks who are running a public utility, like a sewage system, a water system, they really want that thing, we want that thing running 24/7, 365. Their focus is make sure it's going, make sure it works, and trying to really get their attention for something out here that's researchy or, 5, 10 years in the future, very hard, because they're worried about a generator breaking down tomorrow, a leak today. And so the point is, it would be unrealistic to expect the staff, especially utility staff, to really get deep into this. This is something where you need, and that's why I'm talking about documentation and stuff. Give people a package that says, here's what the problem is, here's the reason it's a problem, here's what you do about it.
And Mrs. Palmisano has done that to every one of the city council members. It's not up to the water department to make the decision.
No,
it's up to the city council to make the
But like
decision.
Courtney said, a council will look to their staff to give them advice.
And they do. They look, especially to Mr. McNeese, they're looking for him especially.
That's exactly
to
right.
give them advice on this. Although they said they would do their own research, they also, several members said that they really relied on Mr. McNeese, as we do Courtney here as the city manager. And I have been, until recently, when I've just been busy with work and almost constant contact with he and Mr. Rickelsberger. But at some point, they come back and they say, but the ADA and the CDC and the EPA, and they say all this, and that's why my last speech was saying, yes, but the ADA says, no fluoridated water up to the age of 8, and the EPA just sets it as a contaminant level only. They've never done research on the safety of hydrofluoric acid. And, to try to say, yes, we have these federal agencies, and this is what they've looked into, and this is what they haven't. And against their own recommendations, the EPA has never lowered the standard from 4 down lower than, even though it's been, again, I read the National Research Council that said it should be set at 0 like arsenic and Mylar.
Oh, you look at what the FDA does. It goes back and forth about all kinds of stuff. It's like I said, it's hard to get the attention of somebody running a utility. So you need to distill kind of like 15 minutes to explain everything you need to know about nuclear physics.
I think what they're asking the board to do is to create a recommendation for the city council to send to because they've already done everything you're telling them. Like, they've already done all that.
We
So
want
they're
an
now
agenda
appealing
item.
to the board
Yeah, well,
to make a recommendation to the city council of Elmer, basically.
yeah, and I guess I'm kind of in the same position I think that Melbourne Council's in. I can see both sides of this, sort of. And a huge amount of information, some of which, we still have people that say there isn't such a thing as sea level rise or global warming either. You always have those outliers. And so it's a matter of finding the well-documented.
John, you agree that this needs to be addressed, correct?
Hey, Dave.
Yes.
So that's kind of what I'm asking here, is that you guys all stand together with, that this needs to be looked at. We agree that this needs to be looked at.
Can we discuss our position? Like, can we openly talk
No,
about?
that's what I'm saying, but we agree that this needs to be looked at, correct?
Right.
That we
So-
need to look at.
I know, but we're thinking we're doing something far different than what we actually are here. We're just agreeing that this is a much deeper topic than what is said, and we need to put more time into this. All we're doing is making a recommendation that this needs to be looked at.
By whom?
City
Council, and they're going to make a recommendation that Melbourne should also look into it.
Yeah, so, at this point, he's asked the board to take a position on this. So if, are any board members wanting to put a motion on the floor for a vote?
I've got some stuff to share about some of the observations that I made.
Okay, make it quick, because we're running out of time.
So honestly, I think it's regrettable that we've had to endure as a body a certain degree of deception as it relates to this topic. This started out with us learning that the fluoride we're receiving is not real. That's false. We've been told that we're being poisoned by industrial waste. That's false. We've been told that the World Health Organization claims there is no correlation between fluoride and tooth decay. That's false. And all this can be validated by the YouTube videos of our meetings, in case there's anybody out there that's wondering what I'm talking about. Fluoride is a drug, therefore Europe doesn't add it to their water. Fluoride is a negatively charged ion of fluorine, as Nick said. It literally is an element designated by the letter F on the periodic table. It's not a drug. Also, I thought it was interesting in April when our board asked why the ADA endorses fluoride. The response was offered, the responder offered three reasons: fear of embarrassment, fear of losing public trust, or fear of legal liability. However, there's another perspective here. The ADA endorses fluoride use consumption because it's a known fact, validated by scientific study, that fluoride triggers a response in the human body that causes teeth to harden and thus reduces dental caries. That's their statement. And that fluoride treatments in water are one of the most significant human health benefits of the century. So, I had to go through your slides. Thank you, Julie, for providing those for us. Regarding the slide about water fluoridation is expensive, $57,000 a year divided by 160,000 people is 35 cents a year. Regarding the slide, fluoride is not an essential nutrient. Oregon State University seems to think it's in the Linus Pauling Institute designates it as a micronutrient essential to human health. Regarding the slide, there has never been a single randomized trial. The one that was attempted back in the 40s was stopped early after 6 years because the cohort that was receiving fluoride was so significantly benefited that the investigators halted the study. They didn't need to continue. Tooth decay is high in low-income communities. John, you hit on this one, and there's a survey out that was done in 2005, and sugar intake is inversely related to income. Obvious, sugar causes tooth decay. I think we're all in agreement there. Tooth decay does not go up when fluoridation is stopped. Fluoride is naturally occurring in just about every single water source, natural water source there is. So it's very difficult to validate any significance to that statement. Children are being overexposed to fluoride. referred to the World Health Organization and all other U.S. and international organizations that recognize fluoride as one of the 10 great public health achievements of the last century. The stats on this slide, which we don't see right now, but I looked at them very carefully. The stats on that slide are hardly indicative of Brevard County. Wherever the CDC was talking to, whoever they were talking to, it is not relevant to Brevard County. And I think that that's a very important aspect and point. Dental fluorosis may be an indicator of wider systemic damage. And I had a professor in college let me know during a presentation that I was making, worked really hard on it, and he helped me understand that whenever someone says may, someone can say may not, and the significance of that statement has not been changed at all. The perspective has, and it may be an indicator of wider systemic damage, and it may not. That slide was empty. It tells us nothing. Brevard County residents, there's 1%, less than 1% of professionals that were surveyed. They have less than 1% of dental fluorosis witnessing in their patients. Fluoride damages bone. Too much of a good thing can hurt you. Too much water can kill you. In that slide, it was also mentioned that the mention of fluoride levels in the fluoridated community, they were high, and it also mentioned a high fluoride area in Mexico. Our fluoride is hardly high, 0.5 milligrams per liter. I don't know if everybody understands the whole concept of that, but 0.5 milligrams per liter, if you drink 6 liters, which would actually, you'd end up poisoning yourself with water if you drank 6 liters of water, potentially. You know, you're getting 3.
I drank about that much today because it was hot out. So, you drink gallons of water when it's hot.
Regarding the slide, fluoride may increase hip fractures in the elderly. Again, it's referring to 26 milligrams per day. And our consumption is probably going to be more along the lines of 3 to 5 tops as a result of the fluoride we're getting. The fluoride may cause bone cancer. I thought it was very interesting that the word plausible was used in that slide. And I was checking my understanding of plausible, and I was refreshed to realize that maybe I got that one right on the SAT back in the day. Plausible's definition: superficially fair, reasonable, or valuable, often having deceptive attraction or allure, or having a false look of truth, producing persuasive arguments, especially ones intended to deceive. Precisely what I witness in the messages that are coming out of the Fluoride Action Network. Fluoride may cause reproductive problems. Again, the study was studying rats, and any medical study worth its weight isn't going, any medical decision worth its weight isn't going to be relying on a study of rats. So I think that we definitely need to take a position. And I think that when we hear anecdotal studies of 1 or studies of 4 and things of that nature, we need to be very careful. I know the families in my neighborhood are healthy. The kids are healthy. The moms and dads are healthy. And I think that that's a very important observation for all of us to make. I don't want to cause harm to anybody, but I also don't want to be shrouding myself around information that might not have been validated. And so, with that said, I think that the position that this board needs to take is in an effort to protect the greater citizens of Brevard County, and if we're going to be making a statement, we need to recommend the city makes a statement that there's not a whole lot that's been substantiated, and we do not recommend ending fluoridation.
When you were
Okay.
That we do not, that the city does not recommend ending fluoridation.
Okay, this is my take on it. I personally don't use fluoride, and I haven't used fluoride in a long time, and I choose to make that decision. I don't particularly like anybody telling me what I should do, and I think this is a free country, and you should be able to make your own decisions. And based on what what the research shows, if this truly does prevent cavities, topically is the best way to do it, through toothpaste, mouthwash. So those that believe that and want to protect their teeth, if that's what they think this actually does, buy fluorinated toothpaste. Those of us that don't, I don't want to have to be forced to use, an RO system, even though I do, just because I don't trust the water for other reasons as well, to have to go to those extents. And, there's a lot of people that can't afford RO systems, and they're being forced to have this, to drink this. So that's my personal take on it. Does anybody else have any comments on it, or are we ready to, does anybody want to put a motion on the floor, or?
Well, I think we are creating a motion.
I think,
Go
You-
ahead.
You just raised an interesting point, though. Puts another question in my mind. RO, by its nature, I would expect to take fluoride out. Has anybody tried whether a carbon filter does that?
Does not.
Does not.
Mostly RO and distilled, and the rest means carbon filter will not take on fluoride.
And that's what most people have.
That's what most people have. Like, for years, we had, the refrigerator filter, and everyone came to the house, I'm like, oh, get the refrigerator water, it's filtered. I had no idea what I was filtering for or against, nothing. And I mean, I work outside, and I drink a lot of water, and I'm a kind of small person, so I could have been more adversely affected by things that, maybe a larger person than
Sure.
was inside. But
Nick's been trying to talk for like 25
Oh, I'm
minutes.
sorry.
no, I've got a lot out. I was just going, I was kind of agreeing with some of our other colleagues as far as kind of making a decision here and going forward with this. And after hearing what some of our colleagues have said, it sounds like this is going to be a process, whether we take one position or not, that, it's going to take some time. And I don't see how, moving this along to the city of Melbourne and making that recommendation would hurt. I mean, this fluoride doesn't sound like it has any, great substantial health benefits by any means. It's costing us money. So I would say that we at least take that, the next step of, presenting this to Melbourne and having them, kind of begin something here, because I feel like something needs to be done one way or the other. And
I'm right there with you. I think that we do need to create a motion to cause more research to be done. Maybe not by us, but there is concern within the community, and we have many different views. So there is an actual concern on this issue. So we should design a motion that would
request the
Request that the
city of
city
Melbourne
does.
to,
research this further. I mean, is that
yeah, that can, you could certainly,
because right now,
Put that on the
personally,
floor for a vote.
I'm thinking, I'm still here at organic versus chemical, should we ask for more organic? Because chemical's always cheaper and always.
What
hurts in
about
the long run.
suggesting a working group?
A what?
That Melbourne or somebody host a working group? To look
why do
into.
you want to ingest fluoride? That's my question. What benefit does swallowing do to the body, do you believe?
Well,
Because the CDC says it doesn't help children's teeth, and there's a body of evidence, a strong body of evidence. My biggest concern is the neurotoxic thing, where if children are having reduced IQ, and I looked up SAT stats,
Well, I
you
think,
can look
I think we're
at-
having reduced IQ because of the video games we're playing, personally.
But I don't think in the study group
But-
in Mexico, they had I don't think video games were a big part of it.
Maybe they're doing something else, but I don't know. I don't know those answers.
I just asked this body, why would you want to swallow it? That's just something to think about. If the CDC is saying that the primary benefit is topical, and I read it to you from their documentation, I'll be glad to email it. Like I said, I had heard it, but I finally found the document today. What benefit do you believe it does to the body by swallowing it? And I haven't found any. I mean, I really haven't. So that's what this body, if you want to continue researching, that's the question. And the question that David and my husband said, I don't want it. And a lot of people don't want it, or they don't know whether they want it or not, because they haven't had an issue and they haven't done the research. But I don't want it. And why do I have to have it if I don't want it? I mean, it's either a contaminant or it's a medicine. So it shows up on our annual water survey as a contaminant. Is it a contaminant? Why is it a contaminant? We're putting it in there on purpose. It goes through RO, the water's pure, and then we add this stuff in. There's been no studies on the human body on hydrofluoric acid, hydrofluorosilicic acid on the human body by anybody, not by the EPA, not by the FDA. The FDA has never approved hydrofluorosilicic acid to be put in the municipal water systems. You can contact them yourself. I have. There's been no testing on that. And I was talking to Dylan earlier, at some point, I understand the need for human testing, but it can become immoral and unethical when you're pretty sure it's going to adversely affect humans and you want to test them with it anyway. I mean, we don't do any more human testing on arsenic and lead and mercury. We know what that does.
But there's no one is pretty sure of any of this. No one's pretty sure of any of this.
My point is,
In your research, and you've done a lot, what health benefits does swallowing do to the body?
I can tell you this, I don't have a whole, I think I have one filling, and, I gotta be honest, I mean, put myself out there, I don't visit the dentist regularly, and when I do, things are fine. So my study of one is telling me that everything's okay.
But are we putting dental health above every other health issue in our body?
But I contacted the American Association of Endocrinologists, and I asked them, do you have a position statement regarding the toxicity or the effects of fluoride on the thyroid? They said absolutely not. And they aren't even really bothered with it. They go to their association meetings internationally, and there's not much chatter happening at all. The epidemiology paper that Courtney shared with us was very informing because there was a very articulate counter message to that whole validity of that article being published in the Journal of Epidemiology. And well, I have it on my email and I can email it to you, but the counter message to that whole thing just basically blew the whole thing apart, saying we have to be very careful of allowing this stuff into our journal, and this is why, because it didn't have any backbone to it whatsoever. And so my point is I'm sorry that you're going through what you're going through. I'm happy that you have found a solution to your personal problem, but there are no problems that are coming into my family or the families that I witness in my neighborhood of 5 different streets and get together with 40 different people on the beach and ask every single one of them, by the way, I'm going to be going to a meeting, we're going to be talking about fluoride, what does this sound like to you? And it sounds like probably 80% of the people thought that this is like when Jenny McCarthy was barking about vaccines. You know, that's what it seems like. And that's not my words. This is the words of other people.
Rather than talk about, the perception of someone's concern, maybe we bring it back in and talk about if the board wants to send a recommendation or any, request to the city of Melbourne that, given all of what we've heard tonight, maybe staff can bring that back to you at your next meeting and outline that for you, because I think I've heard issues about informed consent, the possibility that, there could be a difference between the types of fluoride, that there is benefits. There's some people that don't believe that there's benefits, so maybe they could look at that, and we request that they look at that. And so I can write that up for you, and if that's something you want to vote on at your next meeting, we can do that.
And we're going to request that the City of Melbourne looks at that, or that Melbourne Utilities looks at that, or?
City of Melbourne and Melbourne Utilities are pretty much the same thing.
There.
Would we be able to add something in there about just the environmental impact?
Yeah, you can phrase that motion any way you want, and I can add that in there. I'll make sure I can, do that, and that way you guys can see something in writing in front of you. You can pick it apart or whatever you want to do with it, but that way you're looking at something. I know it's getting late and people are getting tired, but, and you heard a lot tonight. It's a lot to digest, and so maybe you can just kind of think about that, and we'll, at the next meeting, I'll bring you back kind of a summary of what they could look at.
I'd like to motion to do that.
Okay.
Specifically, how do I say that? I'd like to motion for you to prepare a statement for the City of Melbourne.
Okay.
I will second your motion, absolutely.
Thank you, guys.
John Fergus,
Yes.
David Vigliotti,
Yes.
Matt White.
I'm confused. A motion for what?
She's going to prepare she just said it,
That the City of Melbourne looks at fluoride?
that there's a concern that we all have in this community about the,
I don't have a concern, no.
No, the motion was, I understood that staff would come back to us
So that we can.
with something we could work with.
Right, what that you all will vote on, right?
It's only for,
And I don't really even need a vote for this. I know, like, if you guys are agreeing that I can bring something back to you to look at your next meeting, then I'll do that, and then you can look at it. But, yes, you all have different ways of looking at this, so we're trying to bring it together, and that's what I'm trying to do for you.
yeah.
And give you something to look at the next meeting.
here.
So
Okay.
we're basically where we are today, next meeting.
Okay.
It's very clear that there's some other board members that might not agree with you particularly, so
No, I
when
know,
we
but-
have that happen, I try to bring something back that everybody can agree on, and you guys can have a bigger discussion at your next meeting when it's not 9:30 and you're tired and you've gone through 2.5 hours of discussion on this issue.
Gotcha.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion. And we're probably going to have to table everything else, I guess.
I told you.
So,
We have one
I
thing
mean,
that
is
you
there
guys
anything
need.
that
We have one thing, staff request. At your next meeting, we need to move you to Thursday, if possible.
okay.
We have budget issues or budget meetings that we have to have at the same, on the
That's
same
fine.
night as your night. Is that okay?
Yeah, we can go to
And if
Thursday.
your workshop,
Retreat council.
Nick is having a workshop that night. Nick is also having a workshop that night at what time? 7 o'clock?
Oh, we can go to
So
that,
if you
too.
all, at all possible, could meet a fraction earlier than that, then we could get this
What
vote
time?
done. 6 o'clock or
6?
6:30? 6 would be great,
6.
On the 26th?
yes. 6th on the 26th.
Oh, you're thinking that we'd do that in an hour?
Yeah,
Well, when are we going to see this document? 2 weeks
yeah,
ahead?
we'll have it in your agenda packet.
Yeah.
We need to vote to agree on the document like we got. If you don't support it, you don't support it. You need to pass that along.
Yeah, but
Curious to see what Melbourne
what
is.
might happen, and what I suspected was going to happen if you voted tonight, you'd have somebody that says, I agree in principle, but there's details that I cannot accept. And instead of working those things out and coming to a closer
Why don't you let
consensus, you...
staff work on that, and then we'll bring it back.
Okay.
Okay.
Does staff have a position on this? Because it almost seems like there is a position on this. Ms. Palmisano in April said that she had a meeting with you, and she said that we might be more successful if we approach this on an environmental front. And if you have a position on this already, and then you're going to be, it just doesn't seem like it makes sense.
Well, it'll be in the writing, you know? It'll be in how she writes it, so you'll have to.
I think
make
if
sure
the
that-
public has a concern, then it is of, importance for us to address that, and there is
But if the
definitely
public is
evidence-
10 people out of 14,000,
It's still the
then
public,
it's-
and it still should warrant more.
And I'll say that before this, I had no position on fluoride before I researched it. I did research it.
I didn't either. I mean, I didn't even think about it until April.
Yeah, we tried to keep the presentation very, non-biased. I mean, everyone has an opinion. We would be lying if we didn't say we didn't have an opinion. But yeah, when we have a resident come in and have a concern, it's my job to address it, so that's what we're doing.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Fair enough.
All right, so I guess we will get this from you next week, or next meeting, and
2 weeks.
in time, we can look it over, you guys can think about it, and hopefully we can bring this to a vote, and we'll also look at all these other action items, or items that we missed tonight. I appreciate everybody staying late. This is a very controversial and hard to understand. It's very complicated. You almost have to be a chemist and stuff like that to really understand it. But thanks, everybody, for staying late, and meeting adjourned.